In an earlier life, Inda Ade had been America's enemy, offering protection to people on the U.S. kill list. But the warlord had since changed sides. He was now on the U.S. payroll and assumed the title of general. The men fired across the rooftops, but it didn't make sense to me what we were doing here, or what the Americans were doing here in Somalia, arming this warlord turned general for what seemed like a senseless war.
We gotta move. So these were Shabab fighters you buried here? If you capture a foreigner alive, you execute them on the battlefield?
That was my friend Jeremy Scahill in Somalia, talking to a Somali warlord who is now a U.S. partner in the war on terror. It's a clip from the exceptional documentary Dirty Wars that opens in theaters tomorrow, directed by Rick Rowley, co-written and produced by Jeremy Scahill. The film takes viewers from Yemen to Somalia to Afghanistan and documents the reality of the American war on terror and its many, many casualties. It is arguably the most comprehensive look at the secret global war on terror that exists, a war that we continue to fight across the globe, a war that day by day, piece by piece, is being dragged into the light. The latest in that process comes from an NBC News report about exactly how much the CIA knows about the people it kills.
NBC News has examined classified documents detailing 114 drone strikes in Pakistan in 2010 and 11. Locations, death tolls, alleged terrorist affiliations. But they also reveal what U.S. officials don't know, like how many killed. Between 7 and 10 in one strike, 20 to 22 in another. U.S. officials do seem certain they almost never kill civilians. In those 114 strikes, only one acknowledged civilian casualty. What's more, about a quarter of those killed are described generically as, quote, other militants.
After a decade of ever-expanding secret wars, we, the American people, are just now having public debate and discussion about the wars we've already been waging. And joining me now is Jeremy Scahill, producer and writer of Dirty Wars, which opens tomorrow, June 7th. He's also author of a book by the same name and national security correspondent for my magazine, The Nation. Jeremy, I want to get your reaction to the Richard Engel story yesterday. It's in the ballpark of other things we've learned along the way about the practice of what are called signature strikes, which is the government engaging in a strike and then not really knowing who has been killed, but assuming that they aren't civilians, essentially.
Right. This was a practice that began at the very end of the Bush era, the end of the second term. And the CIA started saying there are certain regions, it began in Pakistan, there are certain regions of Pakistan that have such intense activity of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda that we're going to just go ahead and classify anyone who's in a group of military-aged males as a terrorist posthumously, or a militant, a suspected militant. As Richard said in his report, he's identifying, the various terms, other militants. And so if you're a military-aged male and you're with a group of others, and someone in that group maybe had been to a mosque that someone the U.S. was tracking attended, or you had been in a restaurant with another individual, and then you end up with another group, if you are killed in that strike, the U.S. will say that you are a terrorist. So what we're saying is, right now, or what we're seeing, is a policy that's continued and intensified under Obama. Obama authorized the expansion of that program to Yemen. And so what we've seen are repeated strikes where the United States is intentionally targeting individuals whose identities it does not know, and against whom they may not even have any evidence whatsoever that they're involved with criminal or terrorist activity.
Based on essentially patterns of behavior. You were at a restaurant with this person who we have ID'd. Right. You made, you showed up at some training camp, or you showed up at some location, not even a training camp, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be, it could also just be purely coincidental, or it could be that these people are actually up to no good. We don't know who we've been killing in these strikes is the point.
One of the things that I think is remarkable about the film, which is it's just an incredible document, and I really want people who of any politics to see this movie, really. I mean, because it is not a very polemical film from a political standpoint. It's just raw footage of what this looks like on the ground. One of the things about it is that when I see a spreadsheet, when I hear, this person died somewhere, it's very hard for me to have a human connection to that number. I mean, it's remote. And one of the things about this movie is you go and talk to people. And this is an interview I want to play, which is the grandfather of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, the American citizen, 16-year-old, who was killed in a drone strike, whose father was also killed, Anwar al-Awlaki, accused.
But not at the same time.
Not at the same time. Accused by the U.S., his father, of being a terrorist, but no one has ever made that accusation about Abdul Rahman. And you are in Yemen. This is you talking to his grandfather.
Abdurrahman left without telling us. He said in a small note that he is going to look for his father. He left from the kitchen window and he took a bus to the governorate of Shabwa. Then when his father was killed, his grandmother told him, there is no use for you to stay anymore. And he said, yes, I will come back in 2 days. On the morning of October 15th, we got a telephone call and they told us he was blown up to pieces by the drone. And they saw only the back of his hair. You know, his relative, his cousin, he knew his hair from the back and he recognized it and he knew that Abdurrahman really was dead. But they could not recognize his face or anything else.
How did reporting this change you?
It gutted me as a person. You know, I don't write articles in the first person, and I don't often talk about myself. I talk about the people that I've met and the stories that I'm covering. And you know, I think in the course of, people will see this as a very personal film, and it wasn't that way in the beginning. We set out to make a very different film, and ultimately, you know, we couldn't not be in it ourselves because it affects all of us as reporters. We're not robots, you know. And I think sometimes when you cover war, you think you can steel yourself and then just jump from one thing to the next. And in writing the script for the movie, I realized how many people I've met. This is all I've done my entire adult life, is this kind of reporting. And I still remember people I met in Iraq in the 1990s, in Basra. I remember families that had loved ones killed in the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and then, of course, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Yemen. And you know, what always strikes me is the incredible humility and kindness that people who've lost so much can show. You know, in many of these cases, I'll go to a place, I'm the only American that they've ever met. Or the only American besides those that did the night raid on their home that killed their loved ones. And I've found myself, and I've been attacked for this, and I say it in the movie, I find myself apologizing when I go into these homes and saying, I'm sorry that we did this to your family. And if people say that makes me unobjective, I don't care. I think objectivity is kind of a farce. It's transparency that's important.
One of the themes of this film is the ways in which the war on terror has and has not changed in the under the presidency of Barack Obama. And it's a very complicated story, actually. It's not as simple as George W. Obama, and it's certainly not as simple as everything was solved when Barack Obama was elected. I want to get into that, particularly in light of today's news, right after we take this break.
This will involve partnerships with other countries. Already, thousands of Pakistani soldiers have lost their lives fighting extremists. In Yemen, we are supporting security forces that have reclaimed territory from AQAP. In Somalia, we helped a coalition of African nations push al-Shabaab out of its strongholds.
President Obama speaking about the war on terror in May, and a long speech, unprecedented in its detail and scope about his theory behind that. And I'm here with Jeremy Scahill, producer and writer of Dirty Wars, which opens in theaters tomorrow, June 7th. On Saturday night at 6:25, I will be at IFC here in New York doing Q&A with Rick Rowley, who directed the film. You guys should come check that out. The president talking about partners. You talk to who some of those partners are. Who are those partners?
Yeah, I mean, well, in the case of Yemen, you know, the United States has been backing something called the Counterterrorism Unit, the CTU, which is supposed to be targeting AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and they certainly have been engaged in battles with them. But when the Arab Spring uprising was happening and there were protests against the dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh, all of the JSOC personnel, our elite special operations forces that were inside of Yemen, pulled out because there was a perception that they were involved with supporting units that were being used by the regime to repress the uprising. And so U.S. counterterrorism funding was actually used in an attempt by the dictatorship to protect itself. And the WikiLeaks cables reveal that U.S. officials repeatedly are in these discussions with the dictator of Yemen, saying to him, you can't use the counterterrorism funding to defend your own regime. And he just basically continues to do it. And, you know, has milked the U.S. with this counterterrorism funding. And in Somalia, you know, part of the story is that the U.S. has partnered with the Ugandan military and the Burundian military, but also we're working with these warlords, as we saw earlier. And the CIA has this base at the airport in Mogadishu. And they actually line, one of the Somali agents told me they line us up every month and pay us $200 in cash. And it's effectively kind of an outsourced kill capture force that's being run out of this CIA base at the airport.
In the airport.
Right. I saw it when I landed. It was crazy. It looked like a forward operating base. We started asking around, and then I got sources within Somali intelligence who liaise with the CIA to confirm that's what it was.
So two huge stories yesterday and today. One about NSA getting all the phone records for 3 months from Verizon. Today about the NSA's PRISM program, which is the servers of 9 different internet companies, including Google. So here's my question to you. My feeling about the Obama administration and the Bush administration and the difference is that much of the same policies have been continued, but what the Bush administration saw as the war giving them an exception around the rule of law, the Obama administration has pushed out and expanded the legal architecture or the interpretation of the law so that all of it is putatively legal. It's the same stuff, but it is now within their assertion of what the law is.
Right. I mean, you look at, under Bush and Cheney, it was just murder Inc. around the world. It's not like, Obama is worse than Bush and Cheney. I mean, these guys, let's be clear, I mean, these guys were running murder Inc. around the globe and violating Americans' rights left and right. Why I think this is such an important story, and I agree with your point, is that because Obama is who he is, because he's a brilliant man, because he is a constitutional law scholar, and because he's popular with the liberal base, he's selling people on the idea that, hey, there's actually a legitimate legal way to do all of these things just by tweaking the Bush-Cheney machine a little bit. And I think he has convinced many liberals that that's what he's doing. I mean, this story, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think a lot more revelations are going to be coming out in the coming weeks.
You're talking about
this NSA story, and I mean, that's all I'll say about it, but I think there's going to be a lot more that we're going to be reading in the coming weeks on this. But we have this pervasive, over-classified obsession with secrecy in the United States government, and there is a massive bureaucracy. American citizens are being spied on. The whole idea of these courts, it's almost sort of irrelevant when you have this behemoth bureaucracy where they can data mine with a 50% likelihood that you might be a foreigner. Right. And what does that even mean? How does one prove that? But if you combine that then with the drone strikes and the signature strikes, we really have gotten out of the business of figuring out who we're actually fighting anymore. And a lot of it is this sort of, it's the anonymous sort of big brother state. And a lot of people say, oh, you're exaggerating. That every time we see these stories, the critics are proven right. Glenn Greenwald has been talking about this through both the Bush and Obama administrations. To me, a lot of his reporting is being vindicated, not just on the war on terror under Obama, but certainly on the issue of civil liberties and the government spying on its own citizens.
Jeremy Scahill, his film is called Dirty Wars, and it opens in theaters tomorrow. It is an absolute must-see. If it comes to a city near you, do what you can to see it. Whatever you think about the president or the war on terror, you have to see it. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris.